Question number 1. So question number 1 says Natalie invests $725 in an account that pays 5.5% simple annual interest. If she keeps the money in the account for 4 years, what will be the total value of the account? Okay, so what we need to do is that we need to use this formula for simple interest to calculate the total. All right, so when you look at your simple interest formula, you need to know what these letters, all right, represent. Okay, so your A represents your total. Okay, so that would be your total amount. The P represents your principal. Your principal will be your starting or initial amount. The R will represent your rate, and the T represents your time. Okay, so what you're going to do is that you're going to have sum total equals sum initial value, and then the 1 always stays the same, plus some rate, and then some period of time. All right, so being multiplied by some period of time. Okay, so it says 725 was the amount she invested in the account before she started to gain interest. So that 725 is her initial or the principal. Okay, the rate you can calculate by looking at the percentage. All right, however, your rate is a decimal, so you need to convert this percentage to a decimal by dividing by 100 or moving a point 2 times to the left. Okay, so this will be 0.055. So that would be the rate. Okay, so all right, so now we're going to evaluate the time. So it says after 4 years, that 4 represents time, so I plug that 4 here. So all I got to do is just put all this in the calculator, and I'll get 884.5. So this would be 884.5. Okay, so now let's try the next question. So next question says a linear equation is shown below. All right, this is the linear equation. This is given in standard form. It wants us to select the statements that are true. So it wants us to identify the rate of change, the y-intercept, and the x-intercept. Okay, so to find your rate of change, you're essentially looking for your slope. All right, but for me to find my slope, I need to convert this into the general form for a line, y equal mx plus b. Okay, so if we have 2x plus 7y equal 28, to convert it into this form, I would subtract 2x on the other side of the equal sign. That cancels out. Now we bring stuff down, so we bring down the 7y, bring down the negative 2x, bring down the positive 28, because again, I cannot subtract an x from something that doesn't have an x. So now we divide by 7, divide by 7, divide by 7. So we get that y is equal to, I cannot divide negative 2 by 7, so I leave it as negative 2 over 7x. 28 divided by 7 is positive 4. Okay, so here I have that y equal mx plus b. So we know that the negative 2 over 7 would be my slope, and another name for slope is rate of change. Okay, so we will select negative 2 over 7. So now you're going to identify y-intercept and x-intercept. So we already saw that the y-intercept is 4, but this is what you can do to also find your y-intercept. So your y-intercept means that when you look at this equation, your x value is going to be 0. All right, so this is the x value, so I'm going to make it 0. So that means that 0 times 2 is 0, so this cancels out. Okay, so now I have 7y equal 28. Now I need to get rid of this multiply by dividing by 7, dividing by 7. So y equal 28 divided by 7 is 4. Okay, so just like what I got in my equation, my y-intercept is 4. So now I'm going to find my x-intercept. So for the same equation, to find your x-intercept, you're going to make your y value 0. Okay, so I'm going to make this value 0. 0 times 7 is 0. So that's gone. So now I have 2x is equal to 28. So now I divide by 2, divide by 2. So x is equal to 28 divided by 2 is 14. So the x-intercept is 14. Okay, so next question. So the next question says, what is the equation of a line that is perpendicular to the line shown below and passes through this point? So first I need to write the equation of this line that's given in the graph. Okay, so the general form for all lines is y equal mx plus b. All right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to write an equation y equals some slope x, some y-intercept. When I look at this graph, I see that the graph intersected the y-axis, all right, at positive 4. So the y-intercept would be positive 4, okay? So now I'm going to identify the slope. So I'm going to go from a solid point to a solid point. Right here's a solid point. And then if we move to the right, not a solid point, not a solid point, solid point, because it's on that intersecting area, okay? So to go from here to here, I would first need to go up by 1, 2. If I went up 2, that's a positive 2, because I went up, okay? Then I would need to go to the right, 1, 2, 3. Because I went to the right 3, that's a positive 3, okay? So my slope would be positive 2 over 3, because I cannot divide 2 by 3. So that's the equation of this line. Now we need to do the perpendicular. So the perpendicular means that we're going to do the opposite reciprocal, or change the sign, flip the number. So I'm going to look at my slope, all right, and I'm going to change the sign. So that means it's going to go from a positive to a negative. And I'm going to flip the number. So that means it's going to go from 2 over 3 to 3 over 2, okay? We don't care about this number when we do perpendicular, so I replace it with the letter B. So all I got to do now is that I'm going to plug in these points, but you can already realize that 2 of these will not be the answer. This will not be the answer because they don't have the correct slope. This will not be the answer because they don't have the correct slope. So now we're going to evaluate after we plug in these points for x, okay, and for y. So I replace y with negative 3, okay. I replace x with 4. Because this is a fraction, I'm going to write it as 4 over 1 plus b. So now the negative 3 I would bring down. The negative 3 and the 4 I multiply, and I would get negative 12. The 2 and the 1 I'll multiply, and I get 2. Okay? So now I have negative 3 equal negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6 plus b. Then I add 6, that gets canceled. And b is equal to negative 3 plus 6 is positive 3. So the positive 3 replaces the b right here. So my answer would be y equal negative 3 over 2x. And instead of plus b, I write positive 3. So this would be my result. Okay? So now we answer the part b. So the part b says they are perpendicular because their slopes are what? The slopes are opposite reciprocal. Alright? We call it opposite reciprocal because, again, you change sign, flip number. So change sign, flip number, okay? The operation of changing the sign is doing the opposite, okay? And then the flipping the number operation is reciprocal, all right? So, again, when I flip that number, I'm doing the reciprocal, all right? When I change the sign, I'm doing the opposite. So that's why it's called opposite reciprocal. Okay? When the two slopes are multiplied together, they equal what? Whenever you multiply a perpendicular to its previous slope, it's always equal to negative 1. You can prove that because our previous slope was 2 over 3. Our perpendicular slope was negative 3 over 2. I multiply them. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. 3 times 2 is 6. Negative 6 divided by 6 is negative 1. So it does affirm the truth. Okay? So next question. So the next question says a cook is adding soup to a 10-liter capacity pot. The equation is given as this. Relates to the liters of soup y added to the pot in x minutes. Select the statement that correctly describes the coefficient of the x term. So I'm only focused on the x term. So that means looking at my equation, I'm only focused at this. But what this equation looks like is that general form for a line, y equal mx plus b, where we know y is your total. So again, y is your total, m is your slope, and b is your y-intercept, okay? So in this case, I'm focused on what is attached to my slope. So already I can eliminate these two things because these talk about y-intercept, but I'm focused on slope, all right? So normally you can use your keywords like per, each, and every, but always check to see if it makes sense. So this 1.25 or 1.5 will be the amount of soup being poured in to the pot, all right? And the pot started at 2.5. So at 2.5, that's when the pot was already at, okay? And we're pouring 1.5 every minute, okay? So in this case, the slope, it represents the rate the soup is being added to the pot per minute. So this will be the answer. This will be wrong because it says it is the slope. It represents the amount of soup produced. The amount of soup produced would be the total. And again, we're only focused on this slope, and this is not talking about total. All right. So this will be off also because of this. So the next question. So the next question says a linear equation is below. All right. So this is our linear equation. But you need to realize that this linear equation is given into something called point slope form. All right. And let's recall what point slope form looks like. It's y minus y1 equal m parentheses x minus x1, where these two values calculate your points, okay? But you have to remember to do the opposite. So this would be my y, but I have to do the opposite. And this would be my x, and I have to do the opposite. So again, these give me my point for y, and this would be point for x, okay? So essentially, when I look at this, if I want to identify my point, okay, so again, if I want to identify my point, I do the opposite of the x first. So the opposite of a positive 4 is a negative 4, opposite of the sign. And then now I do the opposite of my y. So opposite of a negative 10 is a positive 10. So that's my point. So now I'm going to identify my slope. And you need to remember that this m represents slope, okay? So in this case, my slope is negative 5 over 2. So my slope is negative 5 over, not 2, but 4, sorry. Okay? So all I got to do is find a graph that represents this, okay? So firstly, you look at where that point should be. So negative 4, 10, so negative 4 for the x, positive 10 for the y, should be somewhere here. Did this line cross this point? No. So that means that this is incorrect. This would not work. All right. What about B? Well, we first look at the point, negative 4, 10. That looks like it should be here. Did this line cross that point? No. So because it did not cross that point, this would not be the answer. Then I look at this one. Negative 4, 10. Looks like it would be here. Does this look, if it was supposed to be extended more and more and more, would it maybe cross this point? Maybe. So I'm going to think that this might be the answer. Now I'm going to look here. So I'm going to do my negative 4, 10. So it looks like here. This looks like if it was extended, it might get there, but not really likely, but there's a chance. Okay? So to confirm it, now you're going to do your slope. So your slope, you're going to start at the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is here. And then I would try to go down 5 times and then right 4 times. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right 1, 2, 3, 4. Am I on that line? Yes, I am. So more than likely, this is my answer. But let's check this one to make sure. So I start at the y-intercept right here. And I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I get to this line? No. So that means that this is incorrect, and my correct answer would be C. Okay? So now let's answer the part B. So it says use the drop-down menu to correctly complete the statements. So we're first identifying the domain. So the domain are your x values. Okay? To find your x values, you look from left to right. Okay? So I'm going to look at my correct graph. And I'm going to try to identify left to right. So because I see an arrow at the end of this, I'm assuming that this is going on and on and on forever to the left, and it's going to negative infinity. Because there's an arrow right here on the right side, if it was supposed to be bigger and bigger and bigger, it would also go on and on forever to positive infinity. If you go from negative infinity to positive infinity for your domain, that means you're evaluating all real numbers. All right. So again, because there's an arrow, I would assume that it's all real numbers. But if you don't see an arrow and you see it still extended like this, and you don't see anything more, it's still all real numbers, okay? So in this case, it would be all real numbers, all right? So now we're going to do range. So your range aren't your x values, but they're actually your y values, okay? And for your y values, you look from down to up. Normally it's up to down, but I like to say down to up, all right? So I look back at that same graph, and I look from downwards. I see an arrow, so that means it's possibly going on and on forever to negative infinity, all right, because it's going down. And if it's going up forever, because again, I see an arrow, it would possibly go up forever. That's going to positive infinity. Because it's going from negative infinity to positive infinity, that's also all real numbers, all right? If you saw something like this, for example, say you saw this, that's not all real numbers. This would be from -2 going to negative infinity. So for something like this, it would be -2 to negative infinity, all right? And I would have a bracket here because I have a closed dot. But again, you don't see a dot like that, so that means you assume it's going for all real numbers, all right? So again, this will be all real numbers, all right? And then your rate, another name for your rate of change is your slope. And what was the slope of this point slope? -5/4. So my slope was -5/4. All right. So next question. The next question says the Chavez family is on their way home from Tampa. During the trip, the function represented here can be used to model their distance in miles from home after 8 hours of driving. Find D 1.25 and interpret the meaning in context of the problem. So in this case, this 1.25 is replacing the H. And it said H represents hours, so this 1.25 represents the amount of hours, okay? So what this question wants us to do, it says find D 1.25. So all I'm going to do is replace the 1.25 with the H in the equation. So I would have 134 minus 80, parentheses, I replace the H with 1.25, and I just put that in my calculator. When you put that in your calculator, you will get 34. All right, put it in your calculator and you will see. Okay, so in this case, this 34 represents the amount of miles that would be remaining. Okay, so this would be the amount of miles. So again, the H is used to calculate the result, and the result will be the amount of miles. Okay, so we can already eliminate two things. So we can eliminate this one and this one because our result was 34. And remember, the 34 represents miles, the 1.25 represents hours. So I would select this one as the answer, because again, the 34 is the miles, and then the 1.25 is the hours. This is wrong because they have the miles and the hours wrong. All right? So the next question. So the next question says, using the equation provided below, complete the sentence using the drop-down boxes to complete the statement to correctly describe parts of the equation. So already, guys, you should know that this form looks like point slope, okay? So again, it looks like point slope, where we know that point slope is just y minus y1 equal m parentheses x minus x1, where we can evaluate the points and the slope. So the points will be the opposite. This will give you your point for x, or rather for y. Do the opposite. This will give you the point for x. And this is always your slope. Okay? So all I gotta do, guys, is identify my point and my slope. So the point, okay, will be the opposite of this x value, positive 1, opposite of this y value, negative 6. So it's always x and then y, x and then y, all right? And then the slope was this right here, negative 2/3, because again, that's my slope, this number right here, okay? So all I gotta do now is fill out this drop box. The equation above is written in what form? Point slope, slope intercept, or standard? Well, it's represented in point slope. All right. the 1 and the 6 represent what? Well, the 1 and the 6 represent these numbers inside here and here, which are points, okay? So it's not slope, right? It will be points, and then the points will be 1, -6, not -1, 6. Because again, you have to do the opposite of this, okay? So this would be wrong. This would be the correct one. And then the rate of change is, well, you know that another name for rate of change is slope. So the slope was -2/3, so -2/3. All right? So now the final question. So the final question says the students in Mr. Saunders' class are told to write the equation of the graph below. One of the students writes the equation this. Mr. Saunders informs them they made an error. The student incorrectly wrote what? The correct equation should be what? So let's look at this graph, guys. Look at our equation. So the equation we have is this right here. Looking at this equation, we're going to try to identify the point and the slope. Okay? So the point of this equation, okay, will be opposite of this number, -2, opposite of this number, +2. And then the slope of this equation, the slope would be that 1/2. Okay? So let's see if that makes sense with my graph. So firstly, the point should be -2, 2. So -2 for the x, +2 for the y would be here. But did my line cross this point? No. So because my line did not cross this point, that means that the point is what is wrong. All right? So in this case, the rate of change is not what's wrong, but the point of the line is what's wrong. Okay? So now we're going to identify what the correct equation should be. So at first I'm going to identify the point and then the slope. So the point for this one will be 2, -2, and the slope would be 1/2. So 2, -2 would be here. That's on this line, so that's good. And then the slope should be 1/2. So from a solid point to another solid point, I should be, so again, that's a solid point. Again, it's in that intersecting area. So if I went from here to here, I would go up once, right 2, up once means a +1, right 2 times means a +2. So that checks out. So I would select this as the result. This one will be wrong because we do have the point as 2, -2. That's on the line, but the slope is 2. That would be 2/1, which would mean going up 2, right once. If I went from here and went up 2, right once, I should be here. My line is not on that area right there. So this is wrong, and this is wrong because it does not look like the general form, y minus y1. Here we have an x. So this is wrong also. All right, so again, just like that.